no way we can rise now in equity, but have resilience. Get to that diploma and get up out your feelings, right? Number one in the SAT, show respect to me. My classmates are mad fake, but nobody testing me. I'm in my own class rank. No one gets the best of me unless I see a threat to me. Then I'll use the rest of me. My mind in another part of time, so stay back. Y'all in Pacific, I'm in Eastern, y'all are way back. Don't come like Raw Snow, Brink, this ain't made back. See now I'm a rapper, catch an actor, he can scratch it. Oh, why I'm treated different? Cause I studied with nobody, was nobody right beside me to encourage the almighty. I was all alone, built a friendship with my conscience. I ain't need mad help, but shout out to Miss Johnson. There's a few things that I'll never put aside. Maybe that's the reason why they say I had too much pride. I've dumped it down, okay, now I'm arrogant. I already conquered death, I ain't scared of this.
To whom it should concern. I live in the center of Harlem where I attended middle school, but now I go to an elite public high school in Midtown. Two different worlds, only 5 miles apart. At my high school, 93% of students graduate college ready. At my zone school in Harlem, 7%. I didn't realize that an A in Harlem was not the same as an A in a majority white high school on the Upper West Side. I had to go through this process on my own as a low-income child of immigrants who did not understand the American education system. In my high school, I have the privilege of walking through unlocked doors. Security guards sit on corners, in a corner smiling, wishing us good morning. Vast hallways, white walls, high ceilings, bright lights. My own textbooks that I can bring home if I need to. I go to a school where the majority of students are white, and I wonder how I made it there, despite living in a neighborhood where opportunity is slight. Where teachers only stay in schools for 2 years before deciding they've had enough. Where poverty is high and expectations are low. And I cannot help but think what made it this way. What happened in 5 miles that determined who got to graduate, who went to college, who got to explore their talents, who learned to question? To whom it should concern, there are 2 different worlds only 5 miles apart. Please tell me what happened.
What's up, Schomburg Center, and welcome to Teens Take Charge. My name is Yasin Fall, and unfortunately I cannot be there right now, but it's because I'm at Smith College. I'm an intended biochemistry and sociology major, and when I heard that Teens Take Charge had the opportunity to go to the Schomburg Center and host an event, I was super excited. I fell in love with the Schomburg Center in 11th grade when I had a research project on the convict leasing system. And I was just so surprised that such an amazing resource existed a few blocks from my house, and I never knew it existed. So I hope you all enjoy the program, and see you next time.
You blink and think like Cain, still I rise as the king, now watch my reign. So fly that I be the first to touch the ring, gotta close that gap for education in the game.
It's the day after tomorrow. And what I need you to see is that I'm in the eye of the storm. I was never warned, never given time to form my own thoughts in peace. I've gone weeks without sleep because of peeps of Homer. Got my eyes wide shut in perpetual clockwork as I work towards my dream. And it seems like it's someone else's schemes. I just want to subvert, and it hurts to know I'm not equal.
See, the problem is we're not at sea level. The world makes me tremble, and it's hard to know that my heart and mind is not made out of metal. It's like, I'm more like poetry in motion. Sorry.
What's up?
Sorry, I'm gonna start over.
It's okay. Slow. 1, 2, 3. It's the day after tomorrow. And what I need you to see is that I'm in the eye of the storm. I was never warned, never given time to form my own thoughts in peace. I've gone weeks without sleeping because of peeps of Homer. Got my eyes wide shut like perpetual clockwork as I work towards my dream. And it seems like this is someone else's schemes. I just want to subvert, and it hurts to know I'm not equal.
See, we're not at sea level. My foundation is unsettled, and the world makes me tremble because my heart and mind is not made out of metal. And okay. And my heart and mind is not made out of metal. Instead, I'm like poetry in motion, a multi-layered petal, caught in the world's tailspin, and I'm not a rebel. Instead, I must blow like a wind, and...
It's fine. Racial discrepancy.
and
Racial discrepancies, classes separated like oil and water, affluent private schools not mixing real estate tax dollars with charter school scholars, or public school lottery pools not mixing the same water, because it's the day after tomorrow.
And my time already feels borrowed as I'm.
That's fine. Go.
And my time already feels borrowed as I'm drowned like a refugee.
As our individualities,
Personalities,
unique qualities are evaporated consistently, condensing repeatedly, challenging our dignity.
We must channel our thoughts and feelings strategically.
We must base our actions in history.
We must take the Ruby Bridge away from segregation to the highway of equal education.
Our movements must be adaptations, because below are rapid rivers that seep through the cracks, damaging our integration as kids from
The Bronx,
Manhattan
Brooklyn,
and Queens.
are in different classifications as we're living in a hierarchy of education where in American society, the wealthy are on top.
And we're feeling like a skipped over bus stop, wondering when the inequality will stop, when we'll be fine as Little Rock 9 didn't break through barriers for us to be packed up in schools like assembly lines.
Confined by standardized test scores and deadlines, redefined by our SATs and GPAs. Meanwhile, our authenticity is going MIA. And
What does the system have to say about my future anyway? We're tired of being underwater. We're calling for a search and rescue. We no longer want to be ignored like sidewalk residue. It's not just me or just a few. There's many who need saving and something new.
We're tired of seeing rock bottom. We want a better view.
Because it's the day after tomorrow, and my time already feels borrowed.
And I'm feeling washed up,
Drowned like a refugee. Ready. Okay, guys, so thank you for coming. This is Teens Take Charge, and
basically, this is an organization where teens get to basically have their voice heard about education inequity.
yeah, and basically, thank you guys for coming. We hope that you guys take out your phones and, post all over social media. We want our voices to be heard in the system. We want change. And in order to have change, we need all you guys, all your voices to be heard and to be listening and, talking to people about it. So you guys know that outside there are shirts that you guys could buy. It's one for $18, two for $30, and then there's a donation box so that we could keep doing stuff like this. And yeah, so we thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
The Wednesday, prior to my departure to Ghana, July 7th of this year, my mother was rushed to the hospital. Her back had been hurting, and she didn't know why. The doctor responded with, "Oh, that's probably because you're pregnant." I'm gonna be a big brother. For the second time now, my other younger sibling, just started pre-K. My stepmother sent me pictures of him. He was adorable. Plus, my other younger cousin, Carter, is turning 2 this October. This means in up-and-coming years, a lot of kids from my family will be entering the education system in NYC. And then there's me, a high school senior with a lot on his plate. SATs, APs, extracurriculars, and college applications are just a few things I have to go through this year. But I can't be stressed out, I told myself, because it's no longer about me. It's about those who come before me and those who come after me. See, people before me did me a great service. They taught me street smarts. Don't go on that corner. Don't say that this loud on this block. Get your BLTs from this place, and don't watch kids fight too long. Outside the classroom, I kind of knew what I was getting into. Inside, however, was a different story. You see, no one told me about educational inequity. No one told me that some schools are poorer than others. No one told me that at many schools, including mine, less than 40% of kids who graduate enroll in college, even less graduate from. No one told me that the first book that I'll ever read in a classroom won't be hardcover and soft pages. No, it'll be 36 pages of A4 paper just like this, stapled, printed on front and back. That's supposed to last for, 3 weeks? No one told me that the math I learned at my school is nowhere near at the rigor or challenging as the math taught in more affluent schools. I had to learn that the hard way. But again, I'm a senior. I'm almost done with this race. Even if my low-income background gave me a late start, I'm almost done. But it's no longer about me. It's about those who come before me and those who come after me. So I'm going to end this with a question. Who's going to tell them? Who's going to tell my younger siblings that educational inequity exists? Who's going to tell my little brother that his school can't have functioning laptops or textbooks to take home? Who's going to tell my little cousin that he should even try to connect with teachers from his school because in a year or two they'll be gone? To teach out a better, nicer neighborhood? Who's going to tell my unborn sibling that he can get perfect scores in his classes at his high school, but will never score more than 900 on the SATs because his school doesn't offer that, unless he pays for SAT prep or get accepted to a prep program? Who's going to tell them that they're worth less? Not me. No, I don't have the heart to do that. Before anything like that affects them, I will have done my all to do something about that.
Education, the 9-letter word that can dictate my life, your brother's life, your sister's life in the next 9 years. Was it true that I had to go to a privileged high school to be successful, to receive opportunity? The term equity. Equity refers to the principle of fairness. Equity encompasses a wide variety of educational models, programs, and strategies that may be considered fair, but not necessarily equal. It has been said that equity is the process, equality is the outcome. What is fair and just may not, in the process of educating students, reflect strict equality. What is applied or distributed equally. I attend the Urban Assembly School for Law and Justice, located in downtown Brooklyn. My school implements the key principles and standards into the curriculum and student life. Why is it that when I talk to my friend Pachel from a public school here in NYC, she's always asking me numerous questions? Does your school allow you to take your textbook home, or do you have to leave it in the school for the class after years to use? How do you go about the college process? Does the high school assist you in the college process? Because we have a lack of textbooks, and out of 850 seniors, my school only has 2 guidance counselors. I think to myself, wow. I tell him my school has an excess of textbooks, and my high school has 4 guidance counselors for 130 of us. Look at that. Pachel is just one of many, many high school students across the spectrum that is faced with these hardships. It is not fair. Students are not given the proper tools and connections to take the next step in their education to the next level. Why? Why are so many high school students trying to ascertain knowledge and be enlightened, but every step forward they take is another step they're being pushed back? I think to myself, teens, we have to take charge.
Why do I have to prove myself to a metal detector in my school? I'm a student, but my school sees me as a potential threat. I'm armed and dangerous with a notebook and pencils of mass destruction. Have caution. Because whenever I hear the metal detector go, it makes me think of the 99% minority rate of students that occupy my building. Why a metal detector here of all places becomes abundantly clear when you look at the zip code. 11236. 5 numbers define me just as much as the numbers stamped on a prison jumpsuit. I'm ball and chained in a race I wasn't meant to win, and they say no child left behind. How funny. While fancy Manhattan schools get cute vegan juice shops on the corner, the projects are on mine. A memory that's on my mind is the bullet of December 20th. I sit in AP biology, and just as class is about to wrap up, a bullet fires into the room, slamming its presence into the ceiling. The air was explosive. You could taste the gunpowder in the room. Shattered glass lands in my hoodie. Curled up on the floor, I know that that was no sign. It was a reminder of the space I occupy, a reminder that life is too short, a reminder that I'm more likely to get a prison sentence than a college degree. So what does that say about me? Am I even worth the time of some politician? Am I even going to be able to survive this public system derived from red lines meant to separate? True separation is the conversation I had with my mother the day I submitted my high school application. She told me an education is the same anywhere you go. Man, how wrong could she be?
Okay. Comfortable. Yeah, that's how I felt. Comfortable. When I walk down the halls of Vanguard High School, I don't walk far because we only have 2 floors, but I feel comfortable. These classmates of mine, these teachers, our differences become insignificant in the small space we share in our community at Vanguard. I've had teachers who are dedicated to doing the best they can to make sure no child gets left behind. I go to schools with peers who are young, loud, and irrational, just like me, but who are ready to learn if given the opportunity, just like me. The thing is, though, I've known since my first year that what we have at Vanguard isn't enough. Advisory college trips used to be a thing in 9th and 10th grade. They ended in 11th. More and more school events got canceled. Last year, when all the graphing calculators began to magically disappear from our science and math classes, all we could do was suck it up and share. I really began to think about things when I went to China this summer to study Mandarin for a month. In a group of 40 peers from different parts of the US with different racial and economic backgrounds, some of whom had studied the language for more than 6 years, I felt that it wasn't fair. It wasn't fair that before my trip, I had never had the opportunity in my middle school or high school to learn a language other than Spanish. I hadn't asked the questions then when things like receiving worn, outdated textbooks was the norm. But the teachers at Vanguard didn't hesitate to explain to me that the reason we only had 1 foreign language class, the reason I was placed in a beginner class to study Mandarin this summer in China, was because the school did not have the funds to afford another teacher. And as students, we joked about it. The fact that our school was broke. We laughed to hide the fact that this was no laughing matter at all. Our education was being put at risk simply because our school just didn't have the budget to offer more for its students. And it honestly hurt. It made every effort, whether from staff or students, seem like no effort at all. What was I doing any of this for if my school couldn't support me as a student completely? I carry the weight of every single person that is a part of Vanguard's community. I also carry the weight of my books and folders for class because we don't have lockers at Vanguard. We're a school that has a predominantly Hispanic and Black student population, but our potential reaches past our racial backgrounds. Potential that I witness every day go to waste because the community outside of Vanguard won't give us the time of day. I love my school, but I'm unhappy there. A school that could not provide anything more than moral support for its students. What a contradiction we are, right? And the worst part is most of us don't even realize that we are being deprived of a better education. So for those who have graduated Vanguard before me, for the power that will be placed in our hands when my class and I graduate this year, and for the sake of those who will come after me in Vanguard, I'm tired of feeling like being comfortable is not enough. For us, I am having the option to study different languages or having the funds to replace classroom tools are things I don't want to have any of us at Vanguard worry about. Because options means opportunities, and opportunities don't come often enough for people like us.
See, here's the thing. After being Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, woman, You just want to learn in a place that acknowledges right from wrong. Acknowledges that the school to prison pipeline is more alive than ever, that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is more de jure than de facto, that equality is just a pretty word that politicians throw around for applause. Acknowledges that slavery never went away and Charlottesville wasn't a demonstration of freedoms, but a demonstration of hate. Acknowledges that the state doesn't consider you a person until you're able to be an interest group, and acknowledge that our country was never discovered. In fact, acknowledge that our country isn't even our country. I want to learn in a place that's cognizant that we're more segregated now than 50 years ago and that New York City has it the worst. Yet, our schools treat you like replaceable cogs, ready to eat you up, then spit you out into a cubicle where a 9 to 5 is like a broken record, always on repeat, or even worse, we become so replaceable that we can't even make it to that cubicle. Because we're told that we're too incompetent, that we're too Muslim or too black. When we ask for equality of resources and better learning conditions, they cite John Locke and Adam Smith. They cite the ideas of competition and survival of the fittest. Our education is a market. Our minds are commodified. Our souls are drained. I walked into a teacher's classroom one day, asking to acknowledge these issues. He looked at me blankly, angrily, painfully, his eyes filled with a blanket of disgust at the idea of a conversation. I came out in tears, not at the intensity of your words, but at the naive idea that change is something that can be asked for. You know what's funny? My very first college class was a professor explaining power to me. Person A leads to influencing person B and changing the decision to get an outcome. Is person A white parents, the state, our council members? Is their vested power doing something to make us think we deserve less than a sound basic education? Is the result injustice? Person A has money, person B does not. Person A has influence, person B does not. Person A is the president, person B is not. Person A doesn't care, person B suffers the consequences. What if person A was us and person B was them? Person A was a student and person B the DOE. Person A are teachers, person B the politicians. Person A is an idea, person B the implementation. Person A the change maker and person B reacting to the change. What if person A thought it never had power, but now person A realizes that was person B's plan all along?
And now a separate but equal bedroom.
Rich. Pharrell. What are you doing? Rich, what are you doing? Yo, my mans!
Okay. You see this line? This is my side, that's your side. Got it?
What the hell are you doing?
Rezoning.
What?
This side is safe, that side is dangerous.
Are you serious, you selfish prick?
You see? That's what I'm talking about. That side is too dangerous. I don't feel safe.
We roughhouse all the time, and now it's a problem?
That side is too dirty. Look at that nasty stain in the corner.
That was from your dinner 2 weeks ago. You never bothered to clean it up.
I don't recall that. Anyways, this side has better resources.
What are you talking about?
This side has a window. That side has an old radiator. It's probably radioactive by now. This side has a desk, a laptop.
That's my laptop. I gave you my password and I gave you my username.
I don't recall that.
I have the receipt.
Can I see that? Also, this this side gets better test scores.
What do you mean?
You know what I mean.
If I knew what you meant, I wouldn't be asking, dumbass.
You see? That's what I'm talking about. That profanity is so that side.
What did you mean about the test scores?
Oh, okay. You see, when I study on that side, it's too irritado. I get lower test scores. But when I study on this side, it's fantastico. I do much better.
Man, if you don't shut your dumb ass up.
You see? That's what I'm talking about. That's disrespectful. Stay right there. I'll be right back.
I am a young woman rooted in the Bronx and fertilized in poor education. The borough of the underestimated and too many believers, limbo bar set so low, not enough high-end achievers. I am a 99-cent composition notebook full of A equals pi r squared, maybe a few Cupid's arrows on each page, because my attention span is no more than 5 minutes, and I can't help but think that we are in it, but not meant to win it. I am poverty, draped in reused desks and chalkboards, sprinkled with a little knowledge here and there, and drenched with the complaints of the unsatisfied. This system thinks they're doing us a favor instead, and I know it's not wrong to ask why my world has more erasers than lead. I am privileged. Showered in tenured teachers and drenched in private tutors, come and ship those over to my block and see how the other half lives. Because I wonder why we lack the things we need most. What gives? I am years of substitute teachers, a shower of handouts in silence, untapped motivation, crumbling anticipation, half smiles and falsified intimidation. How can you question my morals and quotes and not question my limitations? I am a TNT stick lit from both ends, and I will explode if my descendants are incubated in the dry soil I magically sprung out of, because we deserve more than what's given. Yes, I am a rose that grew from concrete. We don't all have that way of living. I am once upon a time lost in the pages of your books, because I seem to only be that forgotten chapter, and my words have a hard time sending my voice through to the suits and blazers, and I ask, when will we get our happy ending? I am the system, grazing by the public schools, pre-setting your footprints in the sand. Let me segregate based on status, because I have that power and more. But why is it that my efforts to be twice as equal still linger, flopping on crowded floors? I am a vulture, ravenous for knowledge, but left with the scraps and bones of the educational feast, forced to fly where the wind blows. Trust me, there's more to us than you may ever think to know. I am many things, crafted by the astute and the pretentious. I may be forced to swim in a world flooded with numbers, but I am not a statistic.
Education ain't equal. The grass is greener on the other side. But what do I know about grass? Coming from the concrete jungle, a failed education system, forcing kids to drop out and hustle. No parental guidance, a cycle of subsidence. Let me break it down easily. 3 years of high school, no chemistry. High-level math and science classes in our schools aren't a priority, so of course, in STEM and college, there's gonna be a paucity of minorities. Tested by tests we're not prepared for by our schools, so when we fail, we're deemed to have lower ability. Why do we test memorization, but never acuity? Ending up at a low college, a low job. So when I have kids, they end up in the same type of schools like me, my fathers and grandfathers. Because unlike the uptown folks, we have obstacles to surmount. They have more zeros in their bank account. Their network have more paramount. Class size limit, our school's over by 8. But all of this was destined, coming from the Section 8. with teachers leaving within the year, punishing kids that don't care, rather than understanding why don't they care. Because we deem a standard fair in which artists have to be intellectual have to be creative. Everyone is subjugated to one rule. It's like the system's objective isn't to teach in some of these schools. It's just to pass, fail, win, or lose. How do you judge a student's attitude when one school has more opportunities, classes, trips, and community? Unlike mine, where the school has no budget, asking students to bring in loose leaf. Students can't find a place and drift like a leaf caught up in a breeze swaying through the streets. No textbooks, no honor classes, no SAT prep, so our school's average is below average. All because we students were born into a lower tax bracket. So if we have no opportunity, caught up in a cycle, how will we break free? We use our education as key, but they put a latch on the door. Other kids dream to the moon. My school constrains me to the floor. Certain classes never happen. No lab for chemistry, lack of teachers for multiple APs. You see, with a toxic environment in the home and no after-school activities, after school, the kid's only option is the streets. Schools are supposed to be a second home, but with a lack of resources, it's like they can't hold that responsibility. We were losing rest. Had an AP English class extremely stressed because the prep books came a month before the test. In our AP bio class, a bullet comes through the window. Lost in turmoil, screams of crescendo. Thankfully, no one was grazed. We were placed into the same classroom the very next day. No farewell, no goodbye, teacher left. Then we had a substitute with no real prep. Couldn't even conduct labs because of biohazards. Metal detectors forcing me on lines, that ain't a hazard. The liquor store down the street from my block with junkies, that's not a hazard. The fried chicken place across the street raising my cholesterol, that's not a hazard. But my learning is a hazard. Graduate me with a less than 5% college readiness rate. Give me my diploma, then scrape me off the plate. Schools graduate us but don't prepare us for college. We have no support system. Dropping out is the only option. Politicians must feel complacent about our schools because they rarely bring up education when discussion issues of our nation. Kids are pinnacles to the future of civilization. With one group in privilege, more opportunities, how will we understand and function in unity? Don't be fooled by my meticulous skills lyrically. You may be impressed by my poetry, but know this, Jay-Z and Nas taught me more vocabulary than my school ever did. You see, I feel all alone, because all I see is black and brown. The higher I go, the lighter the tone. Darkness got me feeling alone, because the more successful I become, the more lonely I feel because of my skin tone. They say some of us inner city kids give up on school too easily. But I asked my parents this question, I asked my teachers this question, and I'm asking you, how can we, as inner city kids, give up on school too easily if school never believed in me?
Every time that I see large groups of Caucasian people on the train, there's usually two reasons why. Either the Yankees are playing or the kids from Bronx Science got dismissed. On the hour-long trip from my high school on the outskirts of the South Bronx to my college prep program in downtown Manhattan, I'm really nosy, so I usually look next to me when I'm sitting on the train to someone. I'll admit, we've all done it before. But as I see them and I see them pack up when we get to 86th Street or 59th Street, they take their work and put it into their bags and just go. And I just think of the packets that are awaiting me, the math and the English that I so terribly hate. I just think of it and I just say, wow. Later, after 2 hours of supplemental work, my friends and I take the same train back to 167 or to Burnside Avenue. We get home by 8 if we're lucky. And all of this in the hopes of going to the same schools that the kids from Bronx Science go to. That is if we receive enough financial aid. The average household income for 86th Street zip code is about $340,000. Burnside's, $31,000. So I don't know if those numbers seem distant to you, but they are to me. Contributions from parents, alumni, and other private funders give schools like Bronx Science more resources than others. My school, which is located between a mental health center and a halfway house, seems to be in a funding desert. New York City, which is known for its diversity and embrace of immigrants, has the most segregated school system in the country. Although the high school admissions process theoretically gives all students an equal opportunity, black and brown kids seem to get always in the same school. Year after year, they end up in the same place. Meanwhile, students at selective or specialized high school are mostly white, Asian, and most importantly, affluent. Out of the 5,078 students that got accepted into specialized high schools this year, only 524 are black or brown. That's about 10%. In a school system where 70% are students of color. My school, which is predominantly students of color, and 80% meet the requirements for free lunch, promotes helping school students from low-income backgrounds, especially young men, I should say, get into college and change statistics. But the inferior academic instruction, on top of the inferior academic instruction that they got in middle school and elementary school, cripples their chances. My peers perform poorly on Regents exam and SATs, evidence that they are missing out on material essential for college success. 51% of the class of 2016 graduated and went to college. However, only 9% were college ready. The same graduating class at Bronx Science had a 100% graduation rate. What do you think the other number was for college readiness? 100%. My school's average SAT score was an 819. Bronx Science, 1389. More distant numbers. As you can see, there are very sharp contrasts between the education provided to affluent and low-income students. The idea of educational equality is flawed in the sense that a child's early years, which are the most essential, are the ones that they completely miss out on. Even if schools were equal, they could not compensate for the years of being at a disadvantage. The problem is schools widen those inequalities. The admissions test for specialized high schools is flawed. And I'll admit that I took the test and did not do well enough to get accepted. But the exam is not an accurate measure of a student's ability to perform. It is more so empirical evidence of the achievement gap. Specialized high schools should take more factors into consideration, such as academic portfolios and personal statements. I'll continue to make the most of my opportunities that have come my way. And as I start my senior year of high school, I think of those kids, the ones that come from the 86th Street and 59th Street of around the world. For now, I may see them on the train, but next fall, I'll see them at freshman orientation.
I remember the day exactly. All of us scholars came together. We were talking about educational inequity. We were all in the moment, ready for this discussion. One by one, all of us broke the silence with our voices. I began to think about educational inequity and how it affected me. And it was something like this. You go to school 365 days a year to it not being enough. Not enough textbooks, not enough teachers, not enough pencils, not enough diversity, and not enough opportunities. Eventually, after 365 days, these conditions become nothing out of the ordinary. I went on for years with that thought in the back of my mind, but it didn't change the fact that no matter what, I'm still expected to pass all my regents, pass all of my classes, take SATs, and find activities to fill up the blanks on my resume. But it was still at the back of my mind. I wondered, who's gonna listen to me? Who's gonna do something? I was drawn to one statistic which said about 1 in 5 Black and Hispanic students are deemed college ready after 4 years in high school. When I heard this fact, I immediately thought about my school. I thought about the kids who weren't even ready for high school, who didn't come to class, who struggled with their work, but were too afraid to ask for help, who were struggling with everything that they were going through at home. Who was gonna help them and cater to their needs so they could be the best student? I don't know them all personally or what their life was like, but I know in my heart we all deserve a quality education. But it's just not enough. Then it occurred to me, I'm afraid. That statistic scares me because my school is predominantly Black and Hispanic. Each and every single day, we go to this school and we're just hoping that the next day would be better. But I know each and every single one of us has the potential to be great and change this world. In my school, we strive for college and beyond. I always held that dear to my heart because it meant a girl like me from the South Bronx could be something other than a statistic. My school's not perfect, but it's a community. That alone is enough to get me through this. Yes, a lack of resources puts us at a disadvantage, but enough is enough. This moment right here, I am a teen taking charge. I am using my voice tonight, not only for myself, but for all the students at my school, all future graduates.
What is education? Nowadays, education is what some take for granted while others dream of going to school. I believe that although we are very lucky to live in a country where education is free and those who want to pay are able to go to private schools, but what good is it for if there's still educational inequality, especially throughout the city of New York due to segregation in public schools? Speaking about inequality, let's talk about the end of DACA, but the beginning of our fight as a nation of proud immigrants who come to this country in search of a better life. 800,000 people were protected by and depended on DACA for them to no longer live in fear of being deported. The deferred action for childhood arrivals was the best thing that could have happened to two of my cousins after crossing the border between Mexico and the US at a very young age. Now one of them has children who are US citizens, and she depended on DACA for allowing her to work in the US with a work permit. My other cousin also counted on the same benefit as he helped his mother with her expenses. Before DACA, both of my cousins weren't able to attend and study college, and it was devastating to see them in so much, working so many hours but earning so little. After DACA, their lives changed. They were presented with no solutions to their problems, and most importantly, they were protected by the government and were just as equal as any regular American. They were 2 out of the 800,000 people who were affected by this drastic change, and it is not fair that based on the location of where I was born makes me more superior to them or any undocumented person that gives me more opportunities. That is a human right and a dream that was taken away from them just because some believe that a sheet of paper makes someone more important than those who don't have it. Another problem we see in today's society is segregation throughout New York City schools. According to the New York Times, it states, by 8th grade, however, many low-income Black and Hispanic children who have spent their early grades confined to family schools and passed through similarly poor middle schools have already fallen too far behind the competition for the high schools that could prepare them for college. This shows that the ones who require the most education are always neglected the support they need based on their background and where they attended school in their adolescence. We, as a land of free, fail to realize that this leads to an unequal distribution of academic resources like books, technology, materials, etc. So instead of paying billions of dollars for a wall to separate more and more families, why not use that money wisely and help those who need it? Like many have said and will continue to say, immigrants make America great.
I will remember those who fought for racially integrated schools in a segregated nation, those who, rather than stand on the sidelines, took active participation. Children are robbed of their opportunity to succeed lacking the tools because they live in an area which forces them to go to low-achieving schools. In my old middle school, 8% of students met standards on the state math test. That's 8%. Imagine the number of those who didn't pass yet. I'm lucky now to go to a high school that prepares me, yet what about the rest? What about treating them fairly? My zone high school, 18K635, has a 15% college and career readiness rate. May I ask why? Prominent gang affiliations coloring our hallways with shades of red and blue, and the irony that's a part of the cops like color too. We're not all too different, yet not exactly the same, but should our socioeconomic difference be justified as blame that students miss the opportunity for a quality education based solely on the fact that they reside at a particular location? We must not be acquiescent.
ready to accept the time for change is gone? Should not our schools reflect the diversity which we as a city pride ourselves upon? We must question. What do well-funded schools have that underfunded schools don't? Better yet, what can well-off students do that underprivileged students won't? In this sense, we all have equal capabilities, yet it is educational inequity that limits these opportunities. New York has one of the most segregated school systems, housing projects, and economic backgrounds determining the rate of success. The school funds are unequally spread, leading to unequal resource access. James Coleman, former president of the American Sociological Association, in 1966 published a report outlining a study of school performance and race relations. The study found that minority students performed better in racially integrated schools, that students had increased academic preparation with access to these tools. I remember in middle school, not being able to bring textbooks home, weird tasting water ever present at the fountains. Students prosper on the other side of this economic divide, yet we are rendered inert at the end of this mountain. Young elementary school students lack textbooks in phonology, then are expected to ace the grammar section of the SAT. Seemingly drained like the money and resources flow to one side, as so with this delicate sea of equality does one see a change in tide. No after-school programs, increasing potential disruptive behavior. We are the change we seek, yet our apparent success is rooted in failure. They say that it's residential income segregation, the separation of residents by income and isolation. The neighborhoods are split, racially segregated, access to better schools determined by location. Since racially and economically segregated housing leads to racially and economically segregated neighborhood schools, we can increase integration through policies that lead to more integrated neighborhoods. It's not just me, but it's the children we raise. It's more than the past that we are fighting to erase. Lest we forget that it's the past we must remember to face. In times of adversity, we forget that it's commonplace to ignore the problems, ignore the fact that kids need stimulation, recreational programs, resources to aid in their communication. We have a duty not only to ourselves, but to the future generation, to help young minds stand steady on a solid foundation, first by taking active roles in our communities instead of supporting mere narrations. And when change is stagnant, we should organize demonstrations to teach the kids that we are more than our past mistakes, that under pressure we'll persevere because we are well aware of the stakes, that despite the obstacles, despite the politics and more, that we are willing to fight this inequitable war, that the right to a proper education should be granted to all because united we stand, but divided we fall. Let us be remembered, not for lack of contribution, but as men and women of society that when given problems find solutions. Let us not be remembered as dwellers of the past, but as present and future thinkers whose legacy will forever last. I will remember those who fought for integrated schools in a segregated nation, those who, rather than stand on the sidelines, took active participation, those who are willing to fight for students to go to quality schools regardless of learning mode, those who understand that obtaining an education should not be determined by performance, race, tax bracket, or zip code. I will remember those who will fight to ensure that they are well informed. I will remember those who are willing to help change a system that we undeniably formed.
I don't really have anything to say. I mean, can we just give it up one more time for all the students? So my name is Taylor MacGraw. I am the co-founder and the host of an education podcast called The Bell. Thank you. Essentially what happens on the podcast is you hear these voices talking about these issues. So if you're a podcast listener, I hope that you will subscribe. It's called Hearts and Minds. If you don't listen to podcasts, maybe this will be an excuse for you to start. So anyway, after my co-founder, Adrian, and I, who's in the building here, Adrian, decided to do a podcast, I spent about a year traveling to high schools in New York City, interviewing students about their experience in the school system. And it turns out they had a lot to say about race and equity. It's just they didn't really have a platform to talk about those issues. So fast forward, 6 months ago, I approached a few of the students, some of them are on the stage, and I asked them, would you guys want to do a live event where you share these types of stories? And of course they said yes. And so my friend Brett and I, we reached out to the public library and they gave us a space, the Bronx Library Center. And they said they'd be down to host the event. So we bring the students together, they're all in the same room for the first time, and they start planning everything they want to do. And at one point, one of them looks up and says, wait, do we have a name? We need a name. And so anyway, a few minutes later, they had a name. It's called Teens Take Charge. And they had a Facebook account, they had an Instagram account, and we had an amazing first event, which you saw clips of at the beginning. Since then, students have testified at the Department of Education. They've had conference calls with students as far away as Los Angeles. Their words have been published in the New York Times. They've been featured on WNYC. And now here we are in front of a packed house at one of the most iconic cultural institutions in New York City. Can we just give it up for all the folks at the Schomburg Center for this space? The last thing I want to say is that all of this has happened with no budget, no office, no staff. This organization runs solely on the voices of these young people. And I want to thank all of you because it's really your presence that gives their voices power. And tonight, we want to thank in particular the presence of a few adults who I'd now like to invite to the stage. Can we bring our adult panelists up to the stage? Give them a round of applause. And I'm going to take a seat and pass it over to them.
So hello, everyone. How are you guys doing? Great. All right. So just wait a few moments to get everyone settled. Until then, I just wanted to say thank you all for coming. If you guys could actually give yourselves another round of applause. Just to introduce myself, my name is Heba Jamal. I'm a freshman at City College, and currently I work with the organization Integrate New York City for Me and New York Appleseed. And just to start, a few announcements. We have about an hour for this dialogue, and I know there's a lot of people, so it's really packed, so we're going to try to delegate a few issues. On the screen here is 4 main issues we want to address today. And we're going to basically break the conversation into 4 topics, which you can see on the screen. Okay, so everyone settled in. Let's start with our adult guests. If you guys could please introduce yourselves, and we'd like to know 3 things. Who are you? What high school did you attend? And share one brief memory of an influential person or event from your high school days. Brief, please.
Well, I broke that. My name is Ursulina Ramirez. I am the Chief Operating Officer and Chief of Staff at the Department of Education. I went to Covina High School, grew up in La Puente, California, in LA County, so no snaps for LA, sorry. It's okay, I understand the rivalry. I've been in New York for 10 years, so I guess I'm becoming a New Yorker. I would say that my memory in high school, I was really touched by some of the words that you guys were talking about that somewhat resembled my experience. My experience was that my guidance counselor told me that I was not going to go to a four-year college because I had failed a couple of courses, I wasn't doing well academically, and I really pursued my educational career without the guidance of my school. And so I went to a 4-year school. I went to UC Santa Barbara, 2 hours north of LA. And I think that experience really did help push me along both in my schooling, but also in my career. So I'm excited to hear what folks have to say. I'm here to listen, and I'm here to take in your feedback because we got a lot of work to do. And I heard you loud and clear on everything you guys said today. So thank you.
Good evening. My name is Brad Lander. I'm a member of the New York City Council from Brooklyn. It's good to be the only white guy on a panel sometimes. And I'm still really blown away by the Teens Take Charge presentation. So I really want to thank you for kind of speaking truth and preaching and rocking all our worlds and both demanding justice and leaving no doubt that it's deserved. So Thank you. I'm from suburban St. Louis, not Ferguson, but a couple suburbs over from there, mostly white. I went to Parkway North High School. There was, at that time in St. Louis, a court-ordered but still voluntary desegregation program, but still mostly white high school. And certainly one of the people that had the most impact on my life was a high school English teacher who assigned us to write about fear. And he pushed hard. He wanted us to experience fear. So, I don't know, 16-year-old Brad goes off to a part of the city that he's afraid in, and writes a paper about fear. And high school English teacher says, you're not really writing about fear here, you're writing about race and about your own biases and about your neighborhood and that neighborhood, and pushed me hard into thinking a lot more about what white privilege looks like, what my education looked like, and I do think there's a line between that high school English teacher and the work that I've tried to be an ally with you guys on around school integration.
Good evening. My name is Cyrus Garrett. I'm the Executive Director for New York City's Young Men's Initiative in the Office of the Mayor. I grew up actually right outside of Chicago, southwest suburb called Bolingbrook. Actually was born around 73rd and Ridgeland on the south side, and then my parents, as they saw things start changing over in the 80s, early 90s, moved us out to the suburbs. So my high school experience was actually just really milquetoast. I went to a school, but I was an athlete. So my whole high school experience was colored through that experience. I'll tell you a quick story. I'm speeding through a school zone, going about 35 and a 20. I get pulled over, my registration plates are out of date. The cop comes up to my window, takes my license and registration. I'm upset because I'm already late for school. The cop comes back to my door and he says, I can't let you take off with this. Is there anybody I can call at your school to come help you? I said, I don't know who you can call. Calls the school. The principal comes in his brand new Cadillac to pick me up. Why? Because I was number 4 in the country at outside linebacker. That was my experience. The other part of my experience is when I got done, I had a 3.5 all 4 years. I had a 21 on my ACT. And then I got to University of Illinois where I had a full ride scholarship, sat down for the entrance exam. I knew nothing. Nothing. I took remediation class my first 2 years. So, I get you.
What up? My name is Michael Blake. I'm born and raised in the Bronx, New York. I see some of my Eagle cats in here. I see everybody up in the building. Grew up at Creston and Burnside, PS 79, 118, went to DeWitt Clinton High School. I see you, go Governors, we out here right now, I see you. My memory is I was never good at standardized exams. I could never do well on them, no matter how much I tried and studied and practiced. And I remember how there were a lot of teachers that would say you're never going to make it because you're not going to do well on these exams. And there was one guidance counselor, Ms. Greenberg, who said, I know that you really care about journalism, know you care about communications, and you should apply to Northwestern. I didn't know anything about Northwestern. I didn't understand what that meant. And it led to going in for a student interview. After you get accepted, you have the opportunity to go in for an interview to figure out what can happen there. And I told this young woman named Robin, who was an alumni from Northwestern, I don't know anything about college, no one in my family's going to college, but I'm just asking you to give me a chance. And the reason why I'm telling you that is a lot of you are going to hear from someone that you're not supposed to make it. But what we tell everybody is your block should not block your blessing, your zip code should not deny your destiny. And so we want you to know that you can make it. And before we keep going, we always want young people involved. So if you want to come intern in our office is at 156 in Concourse Village West. We want you to come on in. We want young people to know that we believe in you. Let's go.
Good job, Mike Blake. I'm Carmen De La Rosa. I'm an assemblywoman for the 72nd District. That's Upper Manhattan, Washington Heights, Inwood, and Marble Hill. I was born in the Dominican Republic and immigrated here as a baby to a household of a dad who was a bodeguero, a grocery store owner, and a mother who was a home attendant. In my house, Spanish was the only language. And I remember needing tutoring to go to tutoring. How do you do that? I don't know. But I was really, really bad at math. It was sort of my Achilles heel, and I had to try really, really hard. So I had, I went to Mother Cabrini High School in Upper Manhattan. It is now closed, but it was an all-girls school in Upper Manhattan, a Catholic all-girls school run by the nuns. And so as I was going into high school, I remember I needed to do the 7 o'clock in the morning tutoring, to then go to the regular 8:45 class, to go to school, and during the day have to be taken out of class to do the other tutoring, and then after school tutoring. So those of you that mentioned when you were up here, all the need for the extra help, that was me as a high school student. And then finally, I had this one teacher. So math was my Achilles heel, was bad at it, still bad at it. When I was gonna take my Regents, so I already had taken all the Regents that I needed to take in order to get a Regents diploma. Of course, the math Regents was the one I couldn't pass. And I had a math teacher, his name was Mr. Mack. And if any of the women that you ever run into that went to Mother Cabrini High School, you ask them about Mr. Mack, they know who he is. So I took all the tutoring leading up to the Regents. I took the Regents. After the Regents, Mr. Mack said, "Come here." I went up to his office. He said, "You know, I tried really, 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 really hard to find the point in order for you to get your Regents diploma, but I couldn't find it. You got a 55, you need a 65 to get the Regents diploma. I am so sorry, I know how hard you tried." But Mr. Mack made me understand the privilege that I had even in that scenario, where I had the people that could help me, where I had the people that believed in me. I later on went on to go to Fordham University, and I was a HEOP student at Fordham University. And I remember sitting in a sociology class and realizing that I was poor. And saying, you know, here's my sociology teacher talking about income limits and saying, if you have this and this amount of money a year, you're under the poverty level. And I'm like, I've never even seen that together in any of my parents' income taxes. By that point, my father had sold the business off and was retired. And so I remember the conversation with Mr. Mack, and I remember the fact that in my privilege, I hadn't even realized that I was poor, because I never wanted for anything. Anything I ever wanted was there through the sacrifice of my community, through the sacrifices of my parents, and through the sacrifices of the school community that I counted on. So when I hear your words and I hear your experiences, I feel for your experiences. I feel the fact that you are hurting because you know what is lacking in your school. And I thank you guys for actually having the courage to speak up on it, because a lot of us are still asleep and we need to wake up.
Hello, I'm Dr. Karen Ames, Community Superintendent, School District 8 in the Bronx. Doctor, the title doctor makes my mom really proud, because I'm first generation college student. I am grandchild of immigrants to this country. So just because I'm a white woman from Brooklyn, New York, the lived experience is always the same, right? And graduate of South Shore High School when it was 5,000 students, as segregated as it comes, honor classes on the 4th floor, on a split schedule, right? Brought the honor kids in early, got them in early, got them out early, so they could do extracurricular, right? So they thought because you were white and honored and privileged, you had a special guidance counselor that would take you downstairs and show you the catalogs for the private schools, Brown, Brandeis. My parents didn't know what those schools were because they didn't go to college. And my grandparents certainly didn't know what those schools were because my grandmother worked in a sweatshop in East New York, and my grandfather owned a candy store. If it had been in Washington Heights, they would have called it a bodega. Okay, there you go. But it was on Avenue J and Coney Island Avenue. So my grandmother and grandfather took out these coffee cans and handed my mother and father some money, and I was lucky enough to go to the State University. I was the only one of my friends who came from affluent homes who went to a state university. And after 5 semesters, I took for granted that gift, and I failed out, which I don't tell too many people, certainly not my 2 high school kids at home. So that's our secret. Where are my 2 District 8 Bronx studio kids, right? They were just up here. See, I can outdo you, Mr. Blake. Those were my kids. And my mother put a package of tokens on the kitchen table. She said, we can play it 2 ways. You can go to work, or you can go back to school. Because education's going to give you the equity and access that you don't realize is going to change your life. And she put my privilege behind on the subway to Hunter College. And I had all 8 o'clock classes, so I was on that privileged subway at 6 a.m. And after 1 year, 2 semesters, and a lot of history classes, I reapplied and went back to the State University, graduated as a history teacher, and found myself back in my home district of District 21 in Sheepshead Bay, teaching history to middle school kids who came from the projects of Coney Island. So I understood what it meant to pay it forward and make that connection. And I've spent every day for the last 28 years telling that story about how it starts in that classroom with equity and access, and ensuring that every kid has that teacher that sends that message and ensures that we do what's right every day. So I'm proud of you, and I'm proud of what we do together, regardless of what zip code we come from or came from, right? Or, you know, what our lived experience was.
Thank you. So we have a lot to talk about, so I do want to remind the panelists to keep comments just a little bit more brief, just because we want to get through everything. But I want to now quickly introduce students. Everyone just go down the line, just say name and school. Again, I'm going to try to moderate the panel, but also participate in it a little bit. I was a graduate of Beacon High School, by the way, so.
My name is Jedrick Estrella. I go to Victory Collegiate High School in the South Shore Educational Campus.
Okay. My name is Usman Diallo, and I go to Transit Tech in East New York.
My name is Marcus Robinson, and I go to George Weston House in downtown Brooklyn. Yeah, Brooklyn.
My name is Xavier Azim, and I go to school in, I go to Democracy Prep Charter High School right on 134th.
My name is Whitney Stevenson, and I also go to Democracy Prep as well.
Of course, last but not least. My name is Keyshawn Rubin, and I also attend Transit Tech High School, CTE High School.
So now we're going to kick off our discussion. One of the first topics we're going to be talking about is school segregation. And I'm actually going to move Jedrick and Keyshawn to begin speaking about it, just to give a little bit of context, and everyone could jump in whatever they feel like it.
I'll start it off. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, once again. All right, so the topic of school segregation. A lot of us hear it now and then, and most people don't take it as serious because, like, we go day to day and we see our usual brothers and sisters in our school, and we're just, like, so accustomed to it, and we all grew up in that, just like, okay, this race is just where I'm gonna stick to. No, there's more to life than just your color. We're all together here, and we're here to learn about each other. And then when you hear about such topics such as school segregation, we cannot grow. When it's just like, when you hear things like New York City, it's a very diverse place. You guys look around on the train. When you take the train or the bus, any public commuter, and you see all these diverse people on the bus or the train or any of your MTA commuter, whatever the case may be, it's so crazy that up here, that we have the most segregated schools in New York. And then down south, you guys have heard about Ferguson and like Charleston and all these situations happening down there. Guess what? They're beating us because they have actually more desegregated schools. They're actually together down there in their schools. And I heard a couple of my colleagues down there, and they tell me, yeah, we're a very diverse school down here. We have so many different races, and we just like, we love each other. It's like compassionate down there. But then there are also like, I don't even know. It's just, why can't we break that diverse chain up here? I want to pass that along too. Yeah.
So just to give a little bit of context about school segregation, the history of this country, flashback, let's say, I believe 1954 with the Brown versus Board of Education case. And just to give a little bit of context, you had 20 families in Topeka, Kansas, urging to go to a quality school that's near their homes. And the idea that you cannot enter a school based on your race, based on where you come from, obviously angered people. And so they won the case. Separate but equal was deemed unconstitutional. And we think that this court case actually integrated schools across the country. But in reality, we are more segregated than we were 50 years ago. Yes, the South has more integrated schools than places like New York City and Detroit and other parts of the country. As we said multiple times today, New York City has the most segregated schools in the country. South Bronx is the poorest district in the country, and why is that? Where is the income discrepancy? Where is a discrepancy based on class? And the ideas of school segregation are very, very deep. And New York City actually never integrated. We're the most diverse places in the country, but we have never integrated our schools, and we have to ask the question of why.
Just to add on to that, especially going to my school where it's like 99% minority rate of Black and Hispanic students, it's really hard to, like, as I talked about earlier, walk through a metal detector when we talk about dangerous neighborhoods and all these places and how there's school shootings and even places that are like mostly white. It's kind of hard to imagine that in a school in Manhattan, like, you know, there's not even a single metal detector. There's no expectation for crime. There's no expectation of actually being in danger. And it's almost like they have a feeling of safety. While when I go through my school, there's like a long line to get into school, and it's kind of almost like demonizing us and kind of making us seem as if we're dangerous, and it's not the best outlook. And like it says here, Black and Hispanic students in high schools are nearly 3 times more likely to walk through a metal detector than their white counterparts. And when reading that statistic, it really hits me hard knowing that just because I go to school in Canarsie, just because my school was a defunct school that was cut up into 5, just because my school has Victory Collegiate in the name doesn't mean we're looked at as if we're collegiate students. We're looked at as if we're just another part of like the system, so.
If anyone from our adult panelists also want to jump in on this, go for it.
Well, one of the things that I find repulsive, just to be blunt, is that when we talk about diversity in our schools, we talk about diversity as if it's a luxury. Like, oh yeah, we need diverse schools because my child needs to know what it's like to hang out with an Asian child and a white child and a Black child. Well, that's if we're talking in a scenario where we're talking about perfection, right? Our communities don't have the luxury of perfection. And when we talk about diversity in our schools, what we need to be aiming for is schools that are not only diverse in the racial composition of the schools, but also the socioeconomics of the school. Why? Because we see that in schools that are segregated, and we see that in our city, as we heard some of the youngsters coming up here talking about their experiences. The zip codes in our city is what segregates our schools. People are purposely moving into zip codes to ensure that their child gets into a specific school. I remember, I have a 3-year-old. I remember looking at what was my zone school. It wasn't something that I did as soon as I moved in, obviously, because I've been living on the same street for 30 years. It was something that I did after I became a mom and realized my daughter had to go to school. And when I saw that the school that I'm zoned for is an underperforming school, my frame of thought was, why is it underperforming? It's underperforming because we don't have the resources to educate our children. Because when we're counting lunch forms, instead of ensuring that our children have arts, science, math, technology at the disposition of their hands in order for them to educate themselves, we aren't leading in a way that we're gonna make sure that our children have a good education. And when we have the conversation about resources, we have the conversation about the campaign for fiscal equity and the money that is owed to our communities. That money is owed to minority communities that have been historically disproportionately affected by the negligence of the investments made in our community. And you know, part of the budget conversations that we have in Albany, that we have around the city, is about how to make things fairer. But in reality, we have to acknowledge that discrepancy. We have to acknowledge the fact that we have been negligent when it comes to bringing resources into our communities if we want to have honest conversations about desegregating our schools. Because at the end of the day, I feel that people who are more affluent are more well off. They're not necessarily just saying, oh, I want my child to go to a school that's full of only other white children. They're saying, I want a school that has SAT prep, that's gonna make sure that they get into the best colleges, and all of that conversation causes the schools to be segregated, where all schools in our districts should have that same opportunity to thrive, and that's where we've been negligent.
So to piggyback as the instructional partner to an amazing community education council, and that's where teens can grow up and become the first kind of level of, you know, political activists in their communities in supporting the instructional plan in their communities, is thinking about instructional equity and access, right? So as a parent and as an educator, we like when our children go to school close to home, right? Because we like to have them in the community and, you know, able to walk to school, less busing, and, you know, what have you. And that's a reality. And then as they get to middle school, we like them to branch out just a little bit, you guys, right? And then by high school, okay, a little bus and a little subway, okay? So when we talk about ensuring that all schools have that programmatic opportunity and that programmatic equity, that's where we need the support of our CEC, right, our community education councils, and our assemblymen and our state supporters, right, because that's where we do need those dollars to bring into the schools. And I think what's really important, and in a school district like ours, in Community School District 8, that goes from the South Bronx, right, Castle Hill, Hunts Point, Soundview, all the way into Throgs Neck, where we see small schools, middle-sized schools, large schools, it's something that we have worked really hard to provide. So in our school district, if we're partnered with Teachers College, right, everybody gets the reading and writing project. And it's something that I do along with our school leaders. We demand and guarantee that every kid gets that programmatic excellence. And I think that that's important, that that message gets out there from our principals and our assistant principals and our teachers and our parents and our leaders. And you can be those leaders and those advocates and demand that.
So I want to push us a little harder here on what school segregation is and what the Supreme Court was saying in 1954, and ask whether we believe it or not. I mean, I think Heba sort of said, if the question's called, we're failing in the answer. So the Supreme Court was saying in 1954, school segregation is a form of the preservation of white privilege. It has been built through, they said, a system of actions by the government in all kinds of ways, through residential segregation, through school segregation, and it functions to perpetuate white privilege in a segregated system. And the idea that you could have schools which are separate but equal, it sounds like you should be able to have it, right? It's not that there's anything less equal about students full of African American or Latino kids, but what we've proven in this country over and over again is that if we reproduce segregated schools, we will reproduce an unequal society, that we will hoard privilege in white schools and white places. And that is absolutely what we're continuing to do. I mean, we all know it. The evidence is overwhelming. And I think we do have a real question, though, because I sure understand the push to say, let's make sure resources are equal. And I sure believe that schools that were exclusively kids of color can be great schools. But I guess I am persuaded by history that a segregated society will continue to preserve and extend white privilege, and that unless we are willing, even when it's uncomfortable, to push against segregation, we will keep reproducing it. Now, we could do it, but it's hard. We don't have to assign kids to elementary schools based on segregated school zone neighborhoods. It's easier. Yeah, you don't have to pay for busing or push or deny people something they think they paid for when they bought a really nice brownstone in Park Slope. But we don't have to do it that way. Red Hook's not that far. Sunset Park's not that far. Obviously, in middle schools and high schools, we don't have to do it. We could use school assignment policies to produce integrated schools in New York City if we believe they were actually necessary for genuine opportunity and for inclusive democracy. We aren't choosing to do it, which suggests we don't believe it. Now, 5 years ago, we were barely as a city having this conversation at all. We just kind of like papered over the fact that our schools were as segregated as they are. Thanks to some of the young people up here and some people in this audience and some brilliant journalists like Nicole Hannah-Jones and that UCLA study, we have woken up to it. But I guess like this is a question about like what woke means. We can't be sleeping about it anymore. It's clear to us what we are doing. The choices that would change it are hard. But I don't see how you could sit and listen to the young people that spoke from this stage before and not say it is absolutely imperative that we push forward step by step to make them.
So I'm going to let everyone finish their comments for sure. Just to piggyback off of Brad's points and to include voices of students that have worked on this for around 2 years now that don't have the privilege to be here today. Integrate in New York City for me is compiled of students from across the city that have addressed key specific points as to what Brad said. The idea that segregation was intentional and integration also has to be intentional. So what the students compiled was a framework, which actually, if any politicians, any state assembly people, I really advise you to take this definition of integration into consideration whenever you talk about it. Because again, Brad, you mentioned that you have different interest groups that ask the question, well, why do I have to have white people in my school in order to, provide for adequate resources? Well, that's a flawed definition of what integration is about. Integration is composed of 5 R's. The first R is race and enrollment, so covering high school application process, understanding that racial and classist bias is incorporated in it. And then you have resource allocation, which is the idea that there is an inequitable redistribution of resources across schools in the city. And then you have relationships, not only having a diverse student body, but implementing a culturally responsive education platform in order for them to really not self-segregate within the school. And then you have restorative justice. So understanding that disciplinary codes in the Department of Education is racist, is classist, and does proportionately discriminate against students of color. And the last one, finally, is representation, having teachers of color also be represented within the school. So understanding that you need someone there to be able to understand and appreciate and connect with. So that's just a framework that the students across the city have developed, and I urge for people here to really take that definition in mind, because it's not one, it's not the other, it's all of them all at once.
So you completely scooped me. That's exactly what integration has to be. It has to be intentional, has to be all of those R's. But I also want to make sure we revisit Brown, right? So let's really look at what Brown was. Those families weren't saying we need to move out of inferior schools. They actually said those schools are actually pretty darn good. We had teachers that cared for us. They loved us. They watched us. But what they were saying is, I don't want to be denied access to those other schools because of the race of my color. So what happened after Brown was we took that and we kind of fused them together. We said, these people were going to inferior schools. They want to go to better schools because white kids are going to better schools because there's white teachers, there's white students. And what we lost was actually those black teachers, they were making doctors, lawyers, PhDs at a time in which that was hard to do, right? And so we have to look at that with these R's in mind, with the idea that not only are the students of color that are asking, or not even asking at this point, advocating for this point, moving forward in terms of what this integration needs to look at, we also need to understand what that actually does for those upper crust white kids who are in those ivory towers, and what that does to the decision making of who they're going to be when they're CEOs and whatever else they're going to be, and what that does to our society. We have one right now as president. Completely locked out of any idea of what it actually means to be around an actual community. This man's been locked in a bubble for decades. And you see what it does. It addles the brain over time, right? Because you start to believe your own crap. And what I'm saying is, these young people are on to something right here. And we've been working at this with the DOE very closely for the last couple of years. At least I've been in this role at YMI, both diversity of teaching, NYC Men Teach, bringing 1,000+ male teachers of color into the system, pushing to make sure that we're integrating the teaching force, male, female, but also making sure they have culturally relevant education at the forefront of what they're doing, restorative justice practice. The Department of Education has just already asked me to push forward on CRE. These are conversations that are happening, but they have to be pushed from the outside. So I'm not trying to tamp down the activism in this room. I'm saying ignite. Make sure we have marches in front of City Hall. Make sure you continue to push us and hold us accountable to making sure this happens.
After your comment, I do want to jump into something else, but go ahead.
No, and I'll be quick. I do want to say, I'm the COO to the Department of Education, right? My responsibility is to make sure that we are implementing across the board programs and initiatives that are equitable and that are really touching all of our students. We have a segregated school system. I'm also a truth teller, and we need to work on it. And I don't have all the answers. And I know that these students and folks here in the room do, and I know people at this table do, and I think we're taking baby steps, and we need to take bigger steps. And so I'm really proud of the work that we have done on addressing suspensions in our schools, but we still have a disparity in Black and Latino students and how long they're suspended, and not only how long, but they're suspended more often than white students for the same infraction. Those are realities that we are addressing and are faced with every single day. And I do want to agree with my colleague Cyrus. Keep pushing us. The more fire that you guys have, the more energy it gives us to do our work, because I'm not in school every day, and you guys are, and you need to keep reminding us, here's what we're here for. So I want to just say that, and thank you all.
So two quick things here. First, we've been having a conversation around equality on resources, which I want to be real clear. I'm not talking about equality. We need to talk about equity. We need to be very clear that there is a difference in this conversation, that there are many communities that are suffering far deeper, and us just spreading around the resources in an equal manner is not going to fix the problem. And if we want to be focused on that, that's one. And then second, if we want to talk about school segregation, first we should take a step back. We're proud of y'all. And we're grateful for all of y'all, what you're doing right now, right? if we want to talk about how do you want to address segregation, we can't just talk about what's going on in the school. We got to talk about the environment and the culture that we're putting these kids into, right? And so if there's no supermarket in the community, if there's no functioning community that's out there, if folks are trying to figure out how they're going to get to work on time, if you're wondering how I'm going to get them because there's scaffolding in my block and I don't feel safe, we can't just talk about the school without talking about the neighborhood. And so we have to make sure that when we're talking about this, it has to be all intertwined. It's that deeper conversation about how some of these policies don't make any damn sense whatsoever. It doesn't make sense that you have lunch periods during the second period right now. And then you're wondering why kids are hungry for the rest of the hours throughout the rest of the day. It doesn't make sense that you still have eviction policies on the book so that someone can live in a NYCHA development, all of a sudden they're wondering if they can come back home. These things don't make sense. And so we want to talk about segregation, which is important and is critical. We have to make sure that we're also making sure we get the resource for you so we change the neighborhood at the same time.
So now I want to, have a conversation which relates to school segregation as actually one of the almost leading causes, at least in the city, is the high school application process. How many are high school students here by a show of hands? All right. How many of you enjoy the high school application process? All right, that's what I thought. So I wanted to actually move and have some voices of the students now to really talk about their own experience in the high school application process and really try to uncover some of the overarching flaws that are involved in it. So if anyone wants to jump in right now to really talk about their own experience, like this is a moment.
Okay. So like I said before, my name is Usman, and I go to Transit Tech, which is in East New York. My main focus today is to actually talk about the titles that schools provide and I guess the difference between what they're advertising and what they actually have to offer. So I go to CTE school, which is for electricians, technicians, and computer engineers. And so we have shop classes, and I chose the computer side of shop classes. And there's an electrician side, which deals with trains, like we're partnered with the MTA and everything. But my only issue was like the school not having enough classes to push the student within my school to like that career path. Cause like I'm a senior now, and they still give me like regular classes, which is what I do not want, cause I already have all the credits for that class. So instead, they should be giving me classes, or like I guess more shop classes, which is like more physical stuff to do based off of the career path that I want to follow. So also, I guess, sorry. And like how the class suits the child, and the school's giving more classes that will further push a student into a career path instead of only traditional English, math, science, and history. Because right now, like I have regular classes, and I have 2 periods of shop class. And like last year, because of school funding, I wasn't able to take my second certification test to get what is it? To get a certification, because I know I need 3, so that makes it hard for me this year because I have to take 2 certification tests and try to remember stuff from last year, which is going to be hard for me and hard for other kids that didn't have the opportunity to take it that year, which makes it harder for me to even pass and get the certificates to even graduate with that certificate. Wait, Marcus.
Yeah, my name is Marcus Robinson, as you know, and I go to George Westinghouse. And when I was applying to George Westinghouse, they advertised in the book that they offer many AP classes. There's engineering, multimedia, AP computer science, but I didn't get offered any AP classes. I applied to engineering, and I got multimedia instead. And it was only this year, my 11th grade year, that I got AP classes. And they just need not to lie on the book about what's going on, what's actually going on in the school, because what's going on in the school is worse than the book.
One of the programs that are impacted the most by, like one program that impacts low-income communities the most, or like the lack thereof, are arts programs. After the school budget cuts in the recession of 2008, 80% of national public school either lost their entire arts program or the majority of it. And most of those schools were low-income schools because they're just less outside funds that can be allocated into the school, because again, the schools are low-income schools. And this serves as more of a disadvantage with the push on the focus on math and science with the No Child Left Behind Act by George W. Bush, because, No Child Left Behind, okay. Because arts have proven to not only push students to think more creatively, but to think more critically as well. And they help connect different parts of the brain, and by taking that away from low-income communities, which are already disadvantaged by lack of funds, we're taking away essential learning from students, and yeah.
So I just want you guys to kind of picture the high school application process. It's harder than applying to college, actually, in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of kind of points being thrown out here: false advertising, lack of information. When you get there, it's not what you expect. So the process itself is extremely tedious. But I just, for some that don't know how the process works, you have to take an application and rank the schools 1 through 8. And there has been a study that New York City is the most competitive school choice process in the country. And for some schools in the city, it's harder to get into than Yale or Harvard. Just to imagine that schools like Beacon, schools like Bard are harder to get into than some Ivy League schools by percentage rates. And so the key issue here is the application process itself. When Joe Klein's idea is to bridge people from wanting to go across districts and boroughs and try to apply to different schools, but the reality is it just created more disparities in the high school application process. So I really like how some of the people here really have tried to advocate and said they want us on board for projects. Well, here's an actual policy that you guys could implement. So I mentioned that students that aren't here have came up with a lot of policy recommendations. One of them is changing the high school algorithm. The idea right now is that, again, segregation was intentional, integration has to be intentional. Well, one thing, how you can make it intentional, is also including those demographics of integration within the algorithm itself. So how does that work? Some students took a 10-hour coding class just to be able to understand how the algorithm currently works and why it's flawed. The issue is it doesn't take any factors of students' backgrounds in consideration when applying to college. Applying to high school. So what the students have done is actually changed the weights and added weights to demographics such as a free or reduced price lunch, such as a mother's education level, such as what type of middle school you went to, English language learners, adding more points to that, which actually brings more diversity when tested into the schools. So this is something, if you guys really truly care about policy and really truly care about what you can do, is advocate to change the algorithm itself, because that is one of the most that is one of the leading causes to how high school segregation currently works in the city.
Thank you. Just to build on that a little, Heba, I think until 2 weeks ago, the DOE had never essentially proposed doing that across a system of admissions. And I will say that that changed last week. Now, Ursulina talked about baby steps before, but for the first time, in the District 1 schools on the Lower East Side, which are elementary schools, but have been a choice system that did not include any measures of integration in its algorithm, DOE is proposing to put in the exact measures you're talking about in a small but first step District 1 elementary school. some of us in District 15 in Brooklyn, I mentioned my district that includes Park Slope, but also Red Hook and Sunset Park and Kensington, we are pushing hard to get those factors put into our middle school application process in District 15. That's another baby step. And I think you are absolutely right. If we could do it in some elementary schools, if we could do it in a middle school system, we absolutely could do it at the high school system, where traveling across the city is something people already do. And that including those factors in the algorithm is something, and you know, we're closer than we were 2 years ago and 2 weeks ago, but it's going to take a lot more pushing to get us there.
And just on that note, I do want to say, so what we announced in District 1, so we got 16 principals to really buy into this and work through this, and what we're going to be doing is studying this for the course of this year and looking at other districts where we can actually do similar pilots. I do think, I hear you on your recommendation. We have an advisory group that we're going to pull together to kind of pull together all the recommendations that folks have.
Are students on there?
Students will be on there. We're going to, don't worry. But I want to take all these recommendations and figure out how do we make a more systemic plan on how we address this. But thank you.
So since there's been talk and question about to engage with the policymakers, so Carmen and I just talked about this. So we want to sit with you and anyone else that's been creating these legislative policies. And Sabrina's here as my chief of staff. Jesse's on our team. We'll raise your hand. We want to sit down and immediately game out with you how we make this happen. Because at the end of the day, we don't want to just talk about it, we want to be about it, right? So whomever is your person and others, we want to lay it out, but we want to be real clear. We want you to prioritize what the pieces you want us to work on. So if you have 10, 15, 20, whatever the number may be, we want to understand how we go after this, how we make it happen, what actual changes have to happen in this, because we want to empower you. You know, if we're going to say teens take charge, we don't want you to take charge. We want to make sure something happens from this. So we're ready to do this, so we'll follow up with you now.
So I may be your fairy godmother in all of this, right? So we have 3 6 through 12 schools in our district. And one of the things that we just found out in a study was that we have very little attrition from our middle school kids to the high school grades. Kids are not staying, even though we made it easy to avoid the high school process. So that tells us that other than the Bronx Studio School, kids are not happy with the choices that we're giving them to stay in those schools. So we were actually thinking with the CEC of actually changing those schools and dismantling them, right? Making one a middle school and one a high school, because if kids aren't staying, that means that programmatically we're not offering you guys what you want. But before we do that, we would love the opportunity for you to put together a focus group and sit with me and the CEC and those principals and assistant principals and tell us what it is you would like to see there, because you can go right into those middle schools. We have the space. We're sitting with the space. And the middle school process in our district is easy. It's open. It's an open middle school choice process. Anyone in the district or anyone in the borough can actually apply for those seats. And then you would actually be able to stay for high school. So it would make it easy to stay.
I believe a student wants to actually respond.
Okay, so I have 2 things to say. The first thing is, you said students are leaving. I want to question why you think the separation of middle school and high school will somehow lessen or lower the rate of students leaving from middle school to go to a different high school. And the next thing that I would like to say is, we attend Democracy Prep, and the program is a K through 12 program. Out of I started in 7th grade, and we had about 130 students. And out of those 130 students, the majority of our senior graduating class we have about 84, 85 students. The majority of that senior graduating class are made up of the same people that have been there since the middle school. So I was just wondering what resources are or are not being offered from middle school to high school to get the middle school kids switching to another high school, because I don't feel that just separating the high schools enough. I don't know like how that would achieve the goal of retaining those middle school students.
Right. Well, that's what we're saying. We're willing to keep them together if you could tell us what you would like to see to keep them together. Because one of them's supposed to be a science and math school, but yet nobody's staying for science and math. So that we must be not offering the right science and math courses and engineering courses, right, at Archimedes Academy. Right?
Just quickly, we're going to continue this conversation, but also we're going to stay a few minutes after, just so we were going to stay a little bit overtime just so we could get questions from you guys, be able to answer it here. So if you guys have questions, like obviously give it to Taylor, or Taylor's giving it to me. Okay, so you can, sorry to cut you off.
You have more questions? You going to the next topic, or?
Well, if you want to continue.
Anybody?
No, we're good?
We're good.
All right, okay, cool. So this is a question for the students. What is your one wish for what happens next? Whatever you want it to be.
Can I go? For me, what I really want to happen next is definitely for middle schoolers to be educated about the high school application process, because definitely I had nobody to help me to tell me, oh, this school was good, this school was good, this school was bad, this school was bad. I had to kind of figure it all out by myself, and I kind of regret it now, because I didn't have the resources and my counselor telling me, oh, apply to these schools. And even though I took the test, I didn't pass at all and didn't get to go to these prestigious specialized high schools. And I've always been a good English student, scoring 3s on my state test. But then when applying to screen schools, having a 2 was just the determining factor of kicking me out from those schools. I ended up getting my 7th choice out of the 8 schools I applied to.
One thing that I do wish for is I guess a different way of determining whether or not the kid should be accepted to that school or not, rather than just like one of the guys said over there, standardized test, because I also suck at that. But I did pass it in order to get to high school, luckily. But that's just one issue.
I also agree with educating middle schoolers about the high school application process, because the only one I had to help me with the high school application process was my mother, and taking the specialized high school test was my mother, and that was a hard choice, and I didn't even get the score I wanted on the test. It was not good. Man.
One thing that I would like to see change, or that I would like to see in the future, is the elimination of standardized testing for students. National standardized testing was kind of enforced, or the idea of it arose under George H.W. Bush's presidency So, and the whole idea, the whole point of standardized testing, it was supposed to test, it wasn't supposed to test students to see how good they were as students. It was supposed to test schools and test how efficient they were at schools and at educating children. If that was the case, I wouldn't need my SAT or ACT score on a college application. Because the fact that I have to put my region scores means that the school isn't being tested, because people forgot or no longer care about that initial reason. Now I am being tested based on things that I have and have not had, based on disadvantage, regardless of income, regardless of background. I'm being tested on numbers. So can I sit in a room for 3.5 hours and take an exam and score 1,400, or can I not? And if I can't, I'm screwed.
Well, that pretty much says a lot. Honestly, when I think about change, I think about like how heavily stressed like STEM courses are stressed in the school system, because they lack to realize there are students who are interested in arts, music, poetry, spoken word that don't go into that category. And it's like, even when in school you realize like, oh, when they say like specific college acceptances, there's like certain applause. Or if they say another college, they're like, oh, you know, like that concept of like, oh, that college is not good enough, or this high school is not good enough, all because of the stress of, oh, science and math. If this student is going to a college that stress arts, or like written poetry, or like music, like that's when students think about that part of themselves, they feel as if they have to push that away because the school stress so much on math and science and engineering. And yes, you could have those talents, but what about those students who are like having that specific, unique talent that they have to push aside to value this part of the system? So it all goes back to how we could change that, what the system values, because there's a trend. And that's the trend that I feel like could be a major change.
Oh man, to come back from that, you guys all summed it all up. But the one thing I wish to actually see change is probably based on like the SAT scores and being based, like judged off of my GPA. There's more to me than just my GPA. I join activities, I do things for my community. There are other things that I do, like a GPA doesn't define me as a person. And that's one thing I wish that people would like change in this whole curriculum and program. Yeah.
So for me, I honestly always wondered that why is it even in any school, whether it be a school in Manhattan or a school in the Bronx, kids just don't like going to school. So we talk about, you know, we always talk about school integration, school segregation. I mean, you can go to an integrated or segregated school or even college or whatever, and people just don't like sitting in a classroom. And I just wish we really restructured how we think about education. And I wish I didn't have to get a phone call from my cousin that goes to a high school in the Bronx, in the South Bronx, crying to me saying how she doesn't have a science teacher, how she gets bullied every day, how she has to go through a metal detector, and because she wears a headscarf, she has to take off the pins, put them in the box, and put them in the metal detector as if she's being criminalized every day going inside the school. I wish we could just change how we thought about school in general, instead of just taking a test, actually teaching us how to be democratic citizens in society and understanding how it works. But that's just a wish, I guess. Okay, so next. This is actually now for our adult panelists. So what explicit steps forward do you all on stage make towards supporting these students' initiatives? Maybe you could start down the line even.
I had to be first. So I think there's a couple, I think everyone had some really great recommendations that I want to take back. And I actually think, beyond just me listening and representing the DOE, I want to bring you all to the DOE to meet all of our senior leaders to have this conversation about what we need to do as a system, because I don't think, I love all of my team dearly. We don't hear enough from students. And when we do hear from students, and this is no offense because I was ASB president of my high school, so it is from people who are either in some kind of, they're in their council, their school council, and so that's all we're hearing from, and so it's not necessarily a diverse voice of students. And so I would like to bring you all to meet with our staff and to talk about the experiences that you have, and then have a discussion on what policy changes that we need to make at the Department of Education to better support our students.
Look, the partnership that we have built and are continuing to build over the last couple of years through Integrate NYC for Me with Appleseed has been transformative in my life already, and I think is on the cusp of transforming some of our schools. So, you know, DOE did send its whole school assignment team to last year's Integrate NYC for Me meetings. I don't think there would be a plan, even though it's got a long way to go. But for the work that young people and your partners have done, I know for sure that District 1 plan would not be moving. I don't think we would be moving in D15. You know, the next thing I want to see after we get D1 and D15 done is, because high school students are at the point of the spear on this, that taking on the high school system is a pretty powerful next step. So that seems to me the thing we ought to do next together.
And I want to commit, so the Young Men's Initiative, just to give you quicks on this, we are the equity office within the mayor's office. That's our job. We look at the data, we look at the inputs, we look at the outcomes, and we say, we don't care what you meant to do. We're saying this is what you're doing, right? And we need to address this. And so I after being at this panel, I mean, all the things you all are talking about, I applaud your analysis. Your analysis is dead on, right? What's happening to you, right? As the system rolls on, is exactly what's happening to you. I see it in the data every day, right? The thing that you have to understand too is that there are great ideas that are happening all over the city. There are great people in all parts of this government that are working tirelessly on trying to make these things happen. The hardest thing though is that there's a huge nuggety middle that we have to cross over oftentimes of old ideas, outmoded thinking, and just this is the way we've been doing it for 20 years, right? And oftentimes to get across that chasm, we need you guys to continue to advocate and push us on these initiatives. And so I'm just, like I said, redoubling down with you all here today to engage more forcefully within the work of what I'm doing with my partners currently, but also reaching out to these electeds as well. So if you get with them and you come up with some legislative things that you want to push, I'm going to make sure that I'm advocating for it within the mayor's office so that there is a partnership that's happening at the state legislative level down to the local level.
So one of the wishes that came up a few times was essentially helping to navigate from mid school to high school and that process. So, and there was another piece around essentially the help in terms of the preparation of everything like that. So we're willing to host at least 2, if not 3 convenings in our community for anyone, not just from the Bronx, anyone that wants to come through, so we can help and get other volunteers to work with you on how to prepare so that you don't have to do this by yourself. We don't want y'all to have to feel like you gotta do this on your own right now. So that's a tactical thing that we wanna help with. Number 2, we could talk about what we've been doing on the state level. We've been able to get $20 million from My Brother's Keeper, another $18 million for another set of My Brother's Keeper. We were able to do the community school and renewal school funding. Like, that's something that we've been focusing on. And so what I want to hear from you all, and we're going to write this down, tell us the things that you want us to focus on for funding, because we're going into the budget process, going into January, so we can make that the priority of where we're going after right now. If you walk us through these things, we can do these things. How do we did that? We had young people that said they needed help with computers. We were able to partner with technology for families in need and get computers to young people. We had individuals that came to us and said, our adults need help in their communities. We did partnership with the Education Opportunity Center so that families can get connected to the job training components. So if you need help in preparing for high school and understanding about the different opportunities, we're willing to make that commitment of doing those convenings for you and with you to do that. But I also want to challenge the adults that are in the room, because this can't just be a conversation where we're just hearing these ideas unless we're going to step up and actually help them right now. So we need to make it a point to actually go find some young person that's in the room and say, you know what, I'm going to mentor you through the process. I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to rock with you, even if I don't know you right now, to be consistent about this. Actually exchange information, get entrepreneurs and pull them in, because again, this can't be a theoretical conversation, it has to be practical.
Thank you. So I want to just say, what you guys have done today, I'm 31 years old. I'm probably one of the youngest legislators in Albany. And when I walk in a room, everyone says, are they letting interns in here? What's going on, right? But I can tell you that it's been 15 years since I graduated high school. And I hadn't thought about my experience since. I hadn't thought about it. It just wasn't something that I have consistently in the forefront of my mind. And the fact that you all are coming out on a limb to ensure that we're pushing those conversations, that we're going back to when you all were talking about the admissions process. I remember being given that big high school book. And I hadn't thought about that book since I threw it away. So the fact that you all are bringing us back to those moments for us to identify where we can actually make an impact in this system is important and it's invaluable. So I want to make sure that you guys continue to do this work. And as far as what we can do, piggybacking on what my colleagues have already said, oftentimes when we think about advocacy, especially when you think about Albany, especially when you think about the city, special interest groups have an outsourced amount of influence in the decision-making process. And a lot of times, bureaucracy gets in the way of speaking with constituents, with speaking with our young people, making sure that you're part of the decision-making process. And I think that that's the commitment that we have to leave here today, is with a commitment that when I see you walking down the street, you say, that's my assemblywoman, I stop and I listen. You have to force us, continue to force us to listen, and we have to make a commitment that when we listen, we must act, and our actions must reflect what you all are guiding us to do. As Mike said, you know, when we go back to Albany, we have to sit down. We have to talk about what are the changes within that system that we should be doing. I sit on the corrections committee, and I couldn't help but sit here and think, number one, about the children with incarcerated parents that are in this system that we have left behind, a population which you all can give a voice to in the advocacy in the state. And number two, to think about those children. You know, we hear about the studies that begin to put our children in boxes when they take the standardized tests, that in third grade, we know how many prison beds we need in this state given what the scores are, right? So we need to challenge those. We need to challenge those studies. We need to challenge those ideals that want to put our children in boxes, to say, you know what, these children, they didn't get a high enough test score because they couldn't sit for 3 hours. They're gonna end up in jail anyway. We can't give up on our children before they even made it out the door. And so I want to thank you all for doing that work, and see me as a partner, see us as partners in this journey going forward.
So when you began the program this evening, I was sitting next to Ursulina, and I was listening very carefully to you speaking about college and career readiness and what jams up the system to getting you to high school, right? Lack of skills, lack of preparation, lack of teachers prepared to do the job. And as the community superintendent representing the 39 elementary and middle schools in the South Bronx, with the highest rate of kids in temporary housing, 35, 36, 37%, highest rate of kids with parents who are incarcerated, right? And I share those numbers with my colleagues in the other districts in the South Bronx. I'm actually privileged for the last 3.5, 4 years to be working with a community education council that listens and shares the passion for making those changes, so that we can make changes in building a better and stronger community at the elementary and middle school level, so we can build a stronger student body, so that when we get our kids ready for college and career readiness and send them to our high schools, they are stronger and bolder. And at the Bronx Studio School several years ago with Principal David Vasquez, he introduced me on one of my first days to a young man, and he said, you see this kid? He's gonna be one of our posse scholars, right? Right, and I said, okay, and he said to me, you know, I play music, I play in a jazz band, and he said, my parents, you know, both work nights and so on, and I came back Christmas time, and he said, I have a surprise for you, full scholarship to Wheaton. Superintendent Ames. And he became our role model. And Principal Vasquez came to the elementary and middle school principals, and he said, it's because of the work you do that he was ready, right, to go full scholarship, posse scholarship. Our CEC, they're brave people, and our community needs to hear your voices along with them, because they have taken on a huge endeavor in our community of rezoning all of the elementary and middle schools. And they're taking a lot of heat to do the right thing on behalf of the children of our school district. And they don't always get the support that they need to do the right thing. And in the elementary and middle schools, there are people who have vested interest in keeping things status quo, and they hear things like, well, it's never been done, it's been working this way, leave good enough alone. And we say, no, it hasn't been, because we see and hear your voices and the after effects of leaving it alone and not pushing the envelope. So we invite you to sit with us and our CEC alongside of us to educate our community to understand what happens when you leave what other people think good enough alone.
So thank you. I'm going to now call up Nelson to wrap us all up.
We just give it up one more time for all the panelists, students, adults. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. So thank you so much for coming. We love the support that you guys gave, and I hope that you guys keep everybody's ideas in mind and realize that it's up to us to change the system and to change all the problems within it. There's also T-shirts in the donation box in the back when you walk outside. It's one for $18, two for $30. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Picture with them? Can we get a picture with y'all in the church? We come up front and take a picture together?
Thank you guys so much for coming.
Sorry. She don't mind going in the belly of the beast. They about to get her. Yeah.